Hey everybody, Bernakevitch here with All Points Design. That's allpointsdesign.ca. Today I am exceptionally excited because I get to talk with a mentor, a colleague, and an all-around swell guy who has as much self-deprecation as I do, which pretty much means we're Canadian through and through. It means that we've got the stamp and we know we're Canadian because not 2 minutes before we started, he said, I don't really know anything, which I've heard him say many times after he's given me some of the most incredible knowledge possible. So with that, I just want to say thank you so much, Gord Baird, for spending a little bit of time with me today talking about composting toilets.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It begins. We may have to have a Canadian standoff where you say you're sorry and I say I'm sorry, to the point to where we have to just close down the whole call.
There you are.
Gord is one of two, or two of two, definitely a 50-50 partnership and conversation of Eco-sense. That's eco-sense.ca or .com?
.ca.
.ca. We're very Canadian with our businesses. I was speaking
Yes.
with Taylor the other day, and he is a .ca as well. So Gord and Ann Baird, partners in life and partners in crime, as well as one of the most incredible sites that shows how far we can go with sustainable living, producing our own food, working with our own energy, working with our own waste, and seeing it as a resource instead of a waste. And I met Gord years ago when I was out on the West Coast, and when I was teaching and organizing permaculture design courses. We would go and we would tour Eco-sense in the highlands just northwest of Victoria, and every time there was something new. And I think that's one of the things I applaud with you, of you, Gord, both you and Anne. You guys are always working on something new.
Well, thanks, Javan. I don't know what to say to that other than thanks. And sorry, of course.
If you're ever in the area, I know Gord and Ann are now running a nursery, and I think you guys are still doing tours. Are those by appointment, or do you have open tours still?
We are doing tours by appointment, though we have closed down the tours for a great degree. We didn't want to be a part of ecotainment, so the tours we do are for folks that generally get a lot out of it. So it's generally for school groups or garden groups or conservative groups that have no idea about liberal views of ecology, and we try and change their mind.
Wonderful. So it's the indoctrination tours that you're still doing.
We love those, yes.
Good deal. So I've asked Gord today to talk about composting toilets because when I came out to the West Coast 10 years, coming up 10 years ago, I had heard about composting toilets. I hadn't had a lot of exposure to them. In the place that I was living, One United Resource Eco Village, or OUR, or our Eco Village, had composting toilets, and they were good. They were nice. But then when I went and saw Gord and Ann's composting toilets, I think as many people do, I remember, I forget his name. He was a big fisherman. He came up on one of the tours that we had, and he went through and he saw your composting toilet system and said, I can get my wife into this now. I know I can. With these photos, she's going to go for it. And that's one of the many reasons why I asked Gord to talk about composting toilets today. Not only do they have an incredible 2-story cob load-bearing building that has been permitted and been an exceptional example for what to do with natural building in North America, but they've also had these composting toilets and have shown through an incredible amount of testing and an incredible amount of use that composting toilets are not to be feared. And I think we'll start there. That's where we ended in our pre-call, but Gord, you ended with something which I think we should start with. What's the one thing that people should know about composting toilets?
Well, composting toilets, a lot of people have this preconception that composting toilets are dangerous, that they're a way of spreading pathogens, that they are somewhat uncivilized. And when we had our pre-call, the story I explained to you was that I was working on a client's house, and the client had 4 children. And one day, a van came up, had 4 child seats in it, and it was someone from Children and Family Services, and they had come up to take the kids away because the family was using a composting toilet. And much to the mom's ability, she managed to push the child and family service person away and say, "Come back and talk to me on Monday or Tuesday." And then what happened was, very quickly, there was a group of us that got a bunch of information together, sent it off to Children and Family Services. And that included stuff from UBC, from the university, from the stuff we were doing, from stuff that the BC Building and Safety Policy Branch was working on. And the following week, the Children and Family Services said, "I'm not taking the kids away." But what it does is it shows that one branch of government wasn't talking to the other branch of government, and there was a prejudgment that something was dangerous and unsafe and unfit for people. And now, the day that we live in, we have regulations. The province of BC is the first government in North America that offers composting toilets and greywater systems as a complete replacement for flush toilets. It's completely legal now. So we've gone in that, I guess, 8 years from being something that is judged to being something that is completely legal.
It's incredible. It's an incredible story, and it's an incredible journey from that situation and that family and your interactions to where we are now. And I think what you hit on there is a certain type of mindset when it comes to composting toilets. There's a sense that this is not good, that this is backwards, that this is regression in terms of civilization, in terms of living. Where do you think that comes from?
Uh, that comes from ignorance, actually. When you go and you look to Europe, you go to Norway or Finland or Sweden or wherever, one of those countries. There's a country and they've got one composting toilet and there's over 60,000 of the one particular design installed.
Wow.
They're not ignorant of it. Here, we have this fear of it. Europe is much more informed by science and somewhat less focused on the judgment and the fear that's involved with it. We in North America really do lag behind in so many aspects. So it really, I think it comes down to ignorance and lack of exposure. So the biggest thing we can do here, what we've done in the tours and what we've done with the different things that we've done, is try to increase exposure to it. And just as you go into a public washroom, and I'm sure you've been in flush toilets and public washrooms that you would never want to go into again, those are going to exist for some composting toilets. But you go into some beautiful public washroom flush toilets, you can also go into some beautiful compost toilets. There's good and bad on both sides.
I think that comes back to one of the points you made at the end of our pre-call, which is done well, they don't stink, and done well, when used, you'll question if you ever want to go back to flush toilets again.
I'll never flush again. Matter of fact, when I go to the flush toilet, I don't flush. Just leave it. I'm kidding. I do flush.
It's you. It's you. I've wondered who would do such a thing. It's actually you. Oh man, we found him. Everybody, we found him. It's good. No, yeah. Something you said that I found interesting was that Europe is about 20 years ahead of us in terms of the usage, the adoption, not having a certain level of fecal phobia. And part of that, from my experience and doing a little bit of traveling in that country when I was younger, was they've had to literally and figuratively deal with their own shit for a lot longer. They haven't had the ability to spread out as North Americans had. And they have a history. And this is something interesting, kind of taking one step back before we take one step forward. Aristotle talked about three archetypes: the young, the middle, and the elderly. And the young always wants to prove that they know better, they know what they're doing. And it feels like in many ways North America as a whole, or as a society, feels that way sometimes, that we know best and whatever's come before, we'll figure out a new way. Whereas within Europe, Asia, other places that have generational civilization that has some legacy, composting manure has not only been seen as necessary, it's been seen as a way to capture nutrients and keep it, to give back to the land and to keep fertility high.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, you mean you got fertility in the urine, you got fertility in the feces and the resources. And by cycling those materials from food to human and animal back to soil and food, you're capturing that. Where in North America, which is sort of the fast food environment, or the fast food of everything, um, the goal is to consume and then get rid of, put it out of your sight. And that generally means it's flushed and there's a loss of nutrients, and hence then the whole cycle is broken and you have to bring other things in. Europe doesn't have that focus. Europe is much more, Europe and Australia is moving in that direction as well as New Zealand.
Mm, mm.
So we're seeing it all over the planet, actually.
I think this is a good time to point out, this is something that Rob Avis and I say a lot to folks within the Regenerative Business Mentorship Program and offerings, is that there is an incredible tide that has come in, and there's a number of waves to be upon when it comes to regenerative living, regenerative technologies, being able to understand these processes, being able to, if you are interested in design or installation or what have you, it's growing exponentially. When I think about the number of calls over the last couple of years for my design business, and speaking with you on the pre-call about the number of people that are contacting you, it's kind of exponentially curving at this point, no?
It is. Yeah, it's busy. And I mean, we had tried to keep our life to what we call a three-thirds lifestyle. We spent a third of our time working, a third of our time volunteering, and a third of our time doing our own passions. And then we got elected as municipal councillor, so it was a four-thirds lifestyle. But that aside, what's happened is pretty much right now, all of my time is spent working on water and waste systems, and it's all about integrated systems. It's about integrated septic or sewage or recycling systems, integrated water systems. It is exponential.
Wow. Let's take a step back and kind of dive into the composting toilet conversation in specific. So if we were going to tell people what a composting toilet is without the technical aspect, but just casual conversation, talking to somebody in the elevator, what do you do? Oh, I work with composting toilets. What's that? What's your definition to folks that have no understanding?
So if I was to define it to somebody with no understanding, I would say, what a composting toilet is. A composting toilet is an equivalent to a flush toilet, except rather than flushing materials out to a water system, what we're doing is we're taking those materials and hygienically converting them into a resource that can be used in the soil. Basically, what we're doing is it's a nice, simple, clean way of processing human waste, or what I call resources. So if I say waste at all during this conversation, reach through and slap me, please. But it's basically, a composting toilet is a way of collecting human resources and processing them in an ecological way so as to not potentially pollute the environment and to be able to use it beneficially in the landscape. And there's a bunch of different ways that can look.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. But I think that gives us a real sense of composting toilets. Composting toilets is a method or a process to be able to take human excreta and use it in a way that has value, instead of giving it to a system where it may overpower that system, or it may not be used to its highest order of magnitude, really.
Sure.
This reminds me back when I was working with a company called Riverwatch in Edmonton, and we would do these wastewater treatment tours. We'd float down the North Saskatchewan River, jump out at Gold Bar wastewater treatment plant, go through the treatment plant, which the kids affectionately termed the log ride. And then as we got back into the boats, we'd go down. And this one time I was speaking with a student from a high school, and we were talking about the standards and the levels of the effluent that came out of the wastewater treatment plant. And he goes, well, wouldn't it make more sense to have the effluent above where we took the intake for our potable water? And it was interesting because you saw all these kids being like, that's the dumbest idea ever. He goes, yeah, but it would be the best check and balance to make sure that what we put out into ecology was of the highest standard possible, because it was coming back into us.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
it was a really interesting way of looking at the problem in terms of creating checks and balances to keep at a high level. And I think that leads really well into what the next question is, which is, what's the technical explanation of what a composting toilet is?
So the technical explanation of what a composting toilet is so a composting toilet, and because there's so many types of composting toilets and so many different ways of processing materials, I'm going to break it into two definitions: a batch composting toilet and a continuous composting toilet. So the type of toilet we use, defined a batch composting toilet, a humanure toilet, basically is a toilet where we collect our feces or resources into a bucket and our urine into a bucket, and then we process them in a compost pile. And that compost pile has a certain balance of nitrogen and carbon, which allows the compost pile to get very hot and actually perform a true composting process. Composting actually doesn't actually really occur in nature, believe it or not. I mean, it might sound crazy to say that. Mostly what happens in nature is a cool decomposition process. For composting to happen, and you look at the definition from the Council of Canadian Resource Managers, or whatever it is, composting needs heat, it needs air, and for that to occur, it also means that you need to accumulate enough stuff for there to be enough mass for the thermophilic activity. The temperature is over 160 degrees Fahrenheit or 45 degrees Celsius to occur. So that's one type of composting toilet defined. Then there is cool composting toilets. We're going to call those moldering toilets. Those are toilets where decomposition occurs. It takes longer because heat isn't involved. And usually what happens is it's because the urine has been removed either for use somewhere else, or urine has been removed because of it's cumbersome in the collection process, and therefore you don't have the nitrogen to create the high temperatures. In that case, you're relying on a much cooler composting process, a mesophilic composting process, one that is basically runs in the same temperature range as animals live. You know, what, 37.8 degrees Celsius. How warm are you? You're pretty hot, actually. Anyways, sorry, Javan. But we classify these hot composting processes and these cool composting processes all into a composting toilet system, when really it's the processing and getting it to the natural state that is actually the composting toilet process. It's hard to define, and you're looking at me like, geez, Gord, I thought I was bringing somebody in that knew something. Sorry. Again.
Oh, I'm never gonna feel that way, mate. I'm never gonna feel that way. No, you've brought a couple of things up that are important. I think, you know, just as a you know, a guinea pig is not a pig and not from New Guinea. A composting toilet is not, in terms of the moment of deposition, is not a composting place. It's usually where you're taking the resource that comes out of us and then taking that to another place and then working with it in a composting fashion. And I think for a lot of people watching, that might be a whole paradigm shift to realize that composting doesn't happen naturally in nature because it needs human activity or some kind of activity to add the air, to add certain elements, so that way you do get to that thermophilic, to that hot stage, so that way it can move into the mesophilic and then be completely decomposed through that process. Yep. But decomposition does happen naturally, so to speak. Sure. So that's a really good point, is that composting toilets aren't necessarily decomposing right underneath where we are or composting right where we are. I think that helps people right from the get-go to go, okay, well, there's a different process here. So I think this leads us nicely into why composting toilets. You know, you of course are a convert and in the good church of composting toilets, but what are the general reasons that you've experienced? Because you do a lot of design and interactions. Why do people choose composting toilets? And I'm sure there's a range of reasons.
Yeah, that's a good point. So when I have someone that approaches me and says, I want a composting toilet, the first thing I do is actually I give them a questionnaire, because there's many different reasons why people want a composting toilet. And there might be ideological or philosophical that people just want to take control of their own shit, right? They want to be responsible for it. So that's one. There might be some people approach me because they think a composting toilet is going to be cheaper than putting a septic system in,
Mm.
and therefore they're looking at it and they're thinking, hey, this is going to be cheaper. Yes and no. It really depends on the type of system. And then other people will approach me because they're rural and they can't get equipment in to put a septic system in, and therefore it makes sense to put a composting toilet system in.
Mm.
So it might be the ruralness of a site, you know, a boat access only site on an island or in the deep woods up north. It could be the fact that there's no water on site, so they're having to be really water conscious. So it can be a variety of different things why people choose a composting toilet. So ideology, philosophical, water constraints or resource constraints, the site remoteness, and cost. So we have to adjust, and we have to basically teach people, if they want to do it for the sake of cost, this is what you're up against, and therefore people can make the proper choice. But there's a lot of different reasons.
One of the points that you brought up before was that sometimes a site doesn't lend itself well to septic or conventional sewage. Just sometimes where you are and what's going on, it doesn't match. So is there ever a place or a time for either people or situations or land where it's just a hard no, composting toilets isn't a good idea?
Yep. So I would say that if you've got a site that is prone to flooding,
Mm.
then no, because if you have a compost pile out in an area that floods, now you've just been able to disseminate a bunch of pathogens and or potential pathogens to all your neighbors and horses and livestock and kids and fish and all that kind of stuff. If you've got a site that is sheer bedrock, and you don't have the ability to leach away fluids from a compost pile, then you can potentially do a compost toilet, but it'd have to be a very specific one. But yeah, flooding is the biggest one.
Mm.
If you've got a site that floods, you don't want a bucket that's going to flood downstairs of your house, and you don't want a compost pile that's going to float away to your neighbors.
Yeah, yeah. Vector is a huge one. It was something that I encountered with some of the work in both Cuba and Kenya. Is that one, they had never experienced composting toilets before, and they were very keen on big, deep holes. And the research that had been done on those holes was an incredible vector for disease because it was stagnant and stale and just kind of collected. And when we moved into composting toilets and we were starting to educate folks, finding high ground because of the monsoon season was of paramount importance to make sure that it wasn't in a place that was of issue. What's so fascinating though is that for a culture that was very reticent against composting toilets, with just a few examples, it spread like wildfire in terms of adoption. There was a number of composting toilets that were built around the area, and the fertility that came out of that was exceptional. I was spellbound by taking a look at, one acreage to the other acreage in terms of using composting toilets and then using the refined finished compost on their material as opposed to others. You could see it in the bananas, you could see it in the mangoes, you could see it in the jackfruit. It was stunning how different it was. And I think that leads us into this conversation of why are composting toilets beneficial? Why go into it? We've talked about why people might be interested, but what's the benefit on the other side of using a composting toilet?
Well, the main benefit is the redistribution of micronutrients that otherwise is lost in the landscape. So, say if you are in an urban lot and you are eating food, you're pooping in a toilet, and it's getting flushed out to the ocean, um, and then along comes spring, you're then trying to reharness more nutrients for your garden, for your trees, for your shrubs. With a composting toilet, what you're doing is basically any of the nutrients that you get off of your property. So you go to the store, you buy something, you come in, you eat it, you poop, you recycle it, and you put it back into the soil in your land. What you're doing is you're actually increasing the nutrient density, the micronutrients, the phosphorus, the potassium, the calcium, magnesium, and all the other aspects that are part of the soil and what's needed in the soil biome to promote the soil biome, right? Promote the bacteria, to promote the fungi, to promote all the microbes and their health and the plant health. So a composting toilet allows you to basically not get rid of those nutrients into the ocean or a lake or an aquifer. They allow you to keep it on the surface in the soil where it's most useful for the other life forms to create an integrated biology, integrated ecology.
So it increases the potential nutrition that's in the soil, which
Absolutely.
gives the plants an eligible chance to actually uptake that, bring that into the plant body, the vegetative body, the fruiting body, which is normally what we eat, and then bring that back into us. So it's another conversation about closing the loop in terms
Yep.
of the entropy of sites.
Yep.
Brilliant.
Exactly.
So you talked about it already, and we kind of gave away the big reveal, but yes, indeed, composting toilets are legal within British Columbia, which is fascinating. Can you tell me a little bit about the regulations, how they came to pass, and where we are now?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess the way it came about is, and I don't know whether we've had much of an impact in the reason why these regulations came about, but the provincial government, the staff in the provincial government, they approached a person that had done some writing for them for their septic and their sewage system regulations, how do you design sewage systems for the province. And they approached this person, they said, hey, we want to include greywater and composting toilets into our sewage system regulation for the province of BC. And we would like you to write those guidelines for us. And there's one stipulation. We don't want the rules and the guidelines to be tied to standards or anything like that. We want it to be tied to functionality. We don't want CSA or National Standards Foundation standards to be tied to it. We want people to be able to build this on site so that it can work. So this actually was derived from the provincial government pushing it,
Wow.
which is amazing.
What year was this when they approached this individual?
They approached 2014, and by 2016 it had been approved by the province. And so September of 2016, the sewage system regulations in the province of BC had basically encompassed greywater and composting toilets as part of their sewage system regulations. And so now since then, it's just been a period of time to educate the other officials that are involved, the different building inspectors, the BC Building and Safety Policy Branch, and things like that.
So I want to roll it back a bit. So 2014, the BC government is wanting to include this, some individuals. So individuals within a bureaucracy, which normally is the ice around which we want to see change happen.
Yeah.
They came to this individual. Can we say this individual's name? Is that
Sure. His name's Ian Ralston.
Ian Ralston, who is
He's an ROWP, which is a registered on-site wastewater practitioner.
right? And because of his experience beforehand, he was invited to start to develop these functions and objectives based regulations to build this process. And what's interesting about this, and I think it's important for people to realize, is that bureaucracy normally works on a best practices conversation in terms of this is what we think is okay, so we'll make sure it's okay for everyone, which is problematic when we reduce one size fits all to all the incredible milieu of context that we all live in. So instead they said, well, we want it to function in this way. We want it to have these objectives or these outcomes. And how that happens is up to you as the user or the homeowner and the individuals you have to connect with to design this, right?
Right. Changes it from being prescriptive to being functions and objectives, or meeting the intent of the regulation, or meeting the intent of the code. So it's there's definitely a change towards allowing stuff to occur that has the intent and meets the functions and objectives, rather than being prescribed as this is the only way to do it.
Context-based design. We're speaking about the context of the individual and of their area, instead of saying this is what you need.
Exactly. And thanks to Europe for that, because Europe started in that process 15 years earlier. Now
Right.
it's here in North America.
Incredible. So In terms of these regulations, the invite came to Ian, and then what was the process of building these regulations? What did that look like?
So it comes down to doing a lot of reading, doing a lot of discussion, and designing a set of guidelines or standard practices that allow people that are already in the field, ROWPs that are already in the field designing septic systems, to be able to use the same tools they know and to design a composting toilet and gray water system. So uh, it was basically a process of how do we develop a set of tools that is familiar to these folks so that they can just extend it to the next opportunity of new and different types of systems.
Hmm.
And so there's a lot of discussions around that.
So somebody wants to use these regulations. What's the process? Walk us through what somebody would think about, who they would contact, and what they would look at timelines and other things like that.
Sure. Okay. So let's take a new home. Somebody wants to build a new home,
Okay.
and they need a building permit. So if they need a building permit, the first thing they need to do is they need to have a filing for a sewage system. And so that filing for a sewage system, what they would do is they would contact either an ROWP
Mhm.
or an engineer
Mhm.
and folks that design sewage systems. And they would say, hey, I want a compost toilet. I want gray water systems. So the RWP would then design the compost toilet system and a light gray water system and a dark gray water system for the house. They would file it with the health authority. And in the health authority, once it's filed with the health authority, then the homeowner has the approval then that they can give to the building official. The building official checks his box and says, okay, yep, that box is checked. Now I can give you your building permit. Go and build your house. Now there is a caveat to that. Because the BC building code with a sewage system regulation, with a sewage system, the sewage systems falls usually outside of the house. You know, you get to the doorway and you go outside the door of the house, and that's usually where your sewage system begins. It goes to your septic system, or it goes to the community big pipe in the ground that goes to some fish habitat out there. I don't have fins, so I'd like my shit to stay on the ground. And if I had fins, maybe it'd be okay in the water, I guess. But anyways, the with the composting toilet, it is a sewage system that one part of it occurs outside of the house, but part of it occurs inside because you have to have a pedestal and a way of collecting it inside the house before it's processed outside the house. So we need to have the involvement of the building inspector. We need to have involvement of the building code. And right now in BC, that's where we're just sort of fine tuning that. We're trying to bring the BC Building and Safety Policy Branch, the people that design the building code, and just make sure that they align the building code with the new sewage system regulations. So that's right now where there's a little bit of a caveat, a little bit of a gray area, but it doesn't seem to be, it's getting easier to convince the building officials that composting toilets are equivalent to flush toilets.
And you bring up a really good point. There is still some convincing, even though there are regulations in place. It's not necessarily that every single building inspector within the province of British Columbia knows it by heart, understands all the pieces. There is still some education that's required.
Javan, rules change so quickly that it's impossible for the building officials to stay up to date and in tune with every change in the rules and regulations that exist. Just as it is really hard for any health official, for any of the health authorities to stay in tune with it. So really where we're at right now is at a young stage in trying to politely educate all the folks that need to be educated. And it is and trying to do it in such a way where we're setting the best examples.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really important point for folks that are thinking about this, is that there's still going to be some interaction between building officials and yourself. If you're keen on this, there's still going to be some conversations, not only with them, but also with the ROWPs or the engineers that you task to go through that regulatory process. Even if you come up with some ideas yourself, you're still going to be passing that on to somebody else, so that way it's filed through an appropriate channel.
Yeah. Now, if you've already got a house and you've already got a flush toilet in it and you want to install a composting toilet, then you don't really need to go through that process.
Mm.
Uh, but there's still best practices. You still want to make the best practices, and that's where that comes in.
Well, you pulled it out. Let's talk about it. What is that, Gord?
What
What
is
is
that? So, one of the things that we've just recently written, is coming out in the fall, is the Essential Composting Toilets book. It's part of the Chris Magwood series on sustainable building essentials. And so it's a book that's written for not just engineers and building officials, but it's also written for homeowners and contractors and designers. And it gives people I'm going to try and say what it does. It breaks regulations and best practices down into a format that allows people to do that safely and choose a variety of different systems that might meet their needs. So inside the book, there's a dichotomous key that allows people to actually go through and choose a composting toilet system that fits with their needs. So it allows them to make a good decision, and then when they make that good decision, it allows them to design it to meet their needs and do it safely.
incredible? Incredible. Thank you so much for doing that work and putting that resource together. I know we've had the Human Your Handbook from Joe Jenkins for a number of years, but I feels like this is a timely update to not just a bucket system, which is really what Joe has been advocating, but showing the matrix of solutions when it comes to composting toilets.
Yeah, and Joe's book is pivotal in my life, actually, because before Anne would let me marry her, she made me read 3 books, and I had to read 3 books, and the Human Error Handbook was one of them. And if I didn't like it, then I was dumped. So I've loved Joe Jenkins' book, and hence I've loved my wife ever since.
It's a good evaluatory process. I don't think many people do that. What were the other 2 books, just if you don't mind me asking?
The other 2 books were A Reasonable Life by Ferenc Mate,
Mhm.
and the other one was Create a Greywater Oasis by Art Ludwig. So Art, Joe Jenkins, and Ferenc Mate have, they're the key to my love life.
The Holy Trinity, if you will.
Absolutely.
So if we go back to the fact, if you already have a house, you can put in a composting toilet without being outside of any sort of regulatory issues. It's just ensuring that you understand best practices so you don't put yourself or your family at risk,
Yep. Or your neighbors.
or your right, the community at large, right?
Sure.
The immediate family and then the surrounding family as well.
You don't want your neighbor's dog to go down and chow down in your compost pile and go and lick their kids.
It's a problem. It's a
It
problem,
could be. It hasn't been a problem here.
right? But
We just,
that's where good design comes into place, in context design. So if you're in an area where there are animals that can get into the composting pile, which is not, again, the receptacle, as you pointed out, that it has some kind of barrier, some kind of obstacle to allow for the process to go on without being disrupted.
sure, absolutely. And that is if you're using a composting pile. If you're using a system like a moldering system where you collect your materials into a large container, and then those large containers are let to sit for 2 years, then those large containers, you just got to make sure that something doesn't come over and knock them over, like a bear or a big dog or something like that. So it's just about making sure that there's some form of separation, exactly like you say, that stops potential tampering with it.
And that speaks again to context. So if you're in an area where there are bears or there are potential critters that could get into it, then you're going to build appropriately for your context.
Exactly. Yep.
So what are we looking at cost here? Because there's obviously design cost, installation cost, and how do the 2 compare in terms of like conventional septic system, porcelain throne, and then an alternative? Let's go with the compost 5-gallon bucket system,
Sure.
as a lot of people know.
Okay, so if you're looking and this is if you're going through the whole design process and the installation process, okay, for a conventional septic system and a porcelain throne, by the time you hire somebody, design it, file the paperwork, dig up the ground, install pipes, install tanks, you're probably going to be somewhere around the $30,000 mark.
Okay.
If you are going with a 5-gallon human error bucket system, the same one that we use, the same one that Joe Jenkins uses, which personally is my favorite, um, that's a picture of one of our composting toilet bathrooms. So it can be beautiful. Um, You would still need your ROWP to do the design work on it. Design work is expensive. That design work is going to include a light gray and a dark gray water system. So you're probably going to save yourself, in the end, probably about $5,000 to $7,000 off of what a conventional septic system would be. So rather than being $30,000, you might be somewhere between, around the 23,000 mark.
Mm.
So it's still expensive. The actual cabinet, that cabinet there, by the time that you build it and buy your materials, you're probably spending, you've got a couple black buckets there. You're probably going to spend in the neighborhood of about $600 in cabinetry and materials to build that cabinet, and you're probably going to spend about $500 to $800 to build a compost pile. And the rest of the cost is really going to be going to the design and what's involved in dealing with the gray water. Because if you're not making black water and you don't have a septic system, you still have to have your other water go other places.
Brilliant.
Doesn't have to be as robust as a septic system, but it still has to function.
And the reason why it's a little bit less expensive is because of the materials and the installation cost.
Exactly. You're not having to put in as big of a tank. You don't need to do as much excavation. You might be able to infiltrate your excess moisture, your gray water, into mulch basins around fruit trees rather than having to put in a full septic field. So there's many different things that could potentially decrease the cost, but there's still a cost.
Right. And I think that's an important piece. I think a lot of people become enamored with composting toilets thinking, it'll be a couple of bucks, but there is time, money, and energy that needs to be invested into it. And within British Columbia, there's a little bit more effort because you're still underneath that building regulation and you're still within the building envelope. So you have to account to be able to put that to play.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now you've spoken a little bit about it, and we haven't necessarily described or explained it. Light gray water, dark gray water, and black water. Do you want to give us a bit of an example about what that is, or an explanation?
Sure. So black water includes all the water that comes out of your house. It includes the water that comes out of your flush toilet. So it will include toilet paper, pee, feces, kitchen sink water, laundry water. So black water is everything. Then if you break it down, then there is gray water, and gray water is water that comes out of things like the kitchen sink, the laundry, the shower, your bathroom sink. There's two versions of gray water. There's dark gray water and light gray water. Dark gray water is what comes out of the kitchen sink. The reason it's dark gray is because kitchen sink water does potentially have more pathogens and food in it. Dark gray water, if you're rinsing eggs or preparing food, you're putting food down the drain, and water is basically comprised of the food, the bacteria, and oxygen. And so there's more potential food in dark gray water, so you have to treat it quite diligently. Light gray water is very different because there's not much food in it. So basically it's mostly water and not much potential food for bacteria to eat. So you can treat it in a much easier way, such as going to mulch basins. You don't have to filter it. You don't have to store it. You don't have to put it into fancy things. So, the main thing is that dark gray water, you will almost be treating dark gray water like black water because of the potential pathogens that could be in it, and because the food in it, the bacteria eat the food, they use up the oxygen. So if you're storing it, water goes from aerobic to anaerobic really quickly and gets stinky, and then the water's not great. So you really have to plan for the type of water that you're using. Does that make sense?
It does, and it speaks to the issue, which is a good one, is that this is an integrated system within an entire, not only building, but within a lifestyle. So who the individual is that wants to create this, and their family, how much they want to interact with it. Do they want to interact with it daily? Do they want to interact with it yearly? Really starts to build what they may decide to have in terms of a design conversation with a system like this. It's very tailored to the context of the person.
Exactly. So, if somebody doesn't want to interact with their system, then they could, or they don't want to interact with it very much, and they don't want to deal with a compost pile, then what they might do is they might separate their urine and either use their urine or get rid of their urine, put it into gray water. They could use it in their gardens or put it into gray water, but it means that their bin then fills up much more slowly. They don't have to use as much bulking agent because there's not as much moisture in their collection bin.
Yeah.
And therefore the bin can get wheeled away and just stored for a couple years, and there's hardly any contact with it. So, there's that option for people that don't want to be involved in it. There's other systems like Phoenix systems or Clivus Mulcher systems, which are big continuous systems. They're great big things that sit underneath your house, and you poop in them, and a couple years later, the material at the bottom of the bin is ready to be pulled out and composted further. It's not ready to put into your garden because it's all the urine that's come down your toilet has seeped through all the raw materials and has recontaminated all the finished materials at the bottom. So you still have to deal with that. You still have to recompost it or do something with it, but at least it doesn't look like shit, right? So there are options out there, and there's some things that work well in commercial buildings and urban environments. I believe there's a picture there of a bunch of blue Phoenix composting processors. This is in a commercial building, the Bullitt Center down in Seattle. And so this is taking all the toilet materials from a commercial building and composting them, and reducing the loading on the sewage systems. And so this is a system that works great. They have actually vacuum toilets that go, you don't want to make too much of a seal or suck out your innards. But so in this picture here, you've got a jet flush or vacuum toilet in the bottom right-hand corner. And so it can basically transfer materials from a toilet into a Phoenix system or a composting toilet system anywhere. So it makes it quite usable in a commercial or institutional setting. So composting toilets just aren't for the urban environment. We're starting to see them on the most advanced buildings in the world right now, all throughout all continents.
Incredible. I think this image really shows us the variability, and it shows us that while some people might think the 5-gallon bucket system is the only way to go, and some people might think the flush system or the vacuum system is the only way to go, there are so many solutions here. And I really am excited for when the book comes out, because I think it'll be an essential resource for folks that are interested in this conversation and want to be a part of the solution.
Hopefully. I mean, I put a lot of volunteer time into the book, so hopefully people really like it.
Buy 2 copies for both washrooms.
Double. Buy one for your ex, buy one for your parents.
Yeah.
Buy a copy for each of your kids.
Buy a case and leave them in bathrooms that you visit throughout the day, right?
Perfect, Javan. You're on this. I love it.
Well, we'll do a marketing plan for Christmas, so make sure, buy a case, leave it with the relatives. I like it. So, Gord, we've talked about the why of composting toilets. We've talked about the what. We've talked a little bit about the how. Of course, that's a huge conversation. You have a workshop coming up at OUR Eco Village, I believe, in August, that you're going to be teaching for 2.5 days to show people more of the how.
Yeah. So we've got a workshop for 2.5 days at our Eco Village, and I'll be going through the introduction and then looking at the collection systems. So basically the different types of pedestals for the different versions, and then looking at the processing. We'll be building a composting toilet, a bucket toilet, using some plans that people can take away with them, and a confined composting system. So using an IBC tote that keeps everything together. And so the people will be assembling that, and I've done up a video for them. So basically it gives people the ability to gather all the information they need over 2.5 days to make a suitable judgment call and potentially do a lot of the work themselves.
Amazing. And they can find out, folks watching this can find out about that workshop on either your website, eco-sense.ca, or ourecovillage.org, I believe.
Yes, that is correct. I haven't posted on our website as of yet, which today is the July the 5th, but it should be up there. It should be up there within the week. So
Perfect. Perfect. Great, Gord. So just coming back, when we take a look at composting toilets, we know that there's some need for them. We know that there's benefits to them. We know that at least in British Columbia that we have this ability. I'm sure there's folks internationally, and it sounds like there's folks even in our country that are trying to replicate this. If somebody's in a municipality and they're wanting to leverage what British Columbia has done, what would be your advice to them in terms of taking the regulations, talking to their local building inspectors or their regulatory council? How would you advise them to go about working on change in their own context?
well, that's a good question because, being a municipal councillor, um, being a policymaker, I've learned about what it's like when people come and approach you and say that they need things. And usually when people approach their elected officials and start to push them on issues and policies, that's usually quite beneficial at getting things going. So right now, for example, one of the things we have is we have a nonprofit group in Quebec that approached us about the composting toilet regulations in the province of BC, and they have taken all our work, and now they're doing their own campaign to get composting toilet regulations in the province of Quebec. Um, I would say the best thing to do is if somebody is interested in it, that they find a jurisdiction, a local government or a regional government that has water issues, water conservation issues, and is trying to look for solutions and grappling with water use and willing to take on novel new solutions and ideas to grapple with that. That's a really good inroad, is to find the community that's suffering the most from water shortage. I would imagine that in Cape Town, after this past season's drought and water shortage, that there's probably going to be a lot more composting toilets going in. Especially, as you get closer to day zero in Cape Town and people are down to using only 40 liters of water a day, that flushing becomes something that is people, if they don't have to flush, great. So I guess finding the right jurisdiction that's under the most stress and giving them a novel solution and saying, hey, here's where it's been done.
What I take from that is focus on the problems that your regional jurisdiction is facing, and then offer this as a solution to that.
Yeah. Geez, you did that so much quicker than I did, Javan.
Well, that's because I had your raw material to work with. That's a third level joke.
I know the raw material. I know it was shit, wasn't it?
Well, you are the shit, man. You are the shit, as we all are. Gord, man, I could talk to you about composting toilets for hours. I know you got a lot on your plate and a lot to do. I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time for doing this, because it's something that is an appropriate technology. It's a good solution. There's a process of diagnosis. You've taken it from such a great level that I think people can take it and run with it, or contact you, read the book, jump into the workshop. Who knows, maybe we can cajole you to create an online workshop for folks that aren't in the regional area. But I just really want to thank you. I know you worked tirelessly at this, and you had 7 months of donated time. So, at least from one person, thank you so much for your work on this, as well as Anne's work on this, because I know you guys are a team.
Cheers. So this is my urine.
Hopefully.
Actually, I'm kidding. It's peach cider. But anyways, well, if that's your urine, by the way, do you know that 4% of that is solids?
Right, you were telling me about this. Maybe we'll finish with a little factoid. I'll throw up the image as you speak.
The most amazing thing from writing this book, Javan, other than getting the opportunity to speak with you, which is was to learn that, when somebody urinates 1.5 liters a day and 4% of that is solids, that because we urinate so much a day, there's actually more solids that come out of your urine a day than there are that come out of your feces a day. So there you go.
I feel
Just
like I feel like this is when we have the little comment, the more you know, that comes over our heads.
there you go.
Gord, thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it. If folks enjoyed this conversation with Gord, I've been politely poking Gord for a couple of months now to maybe do something a bit more regular. If you like this, Gord is a fount of knowledge about composting toilets, gray water systems, black water systems, irrigation systems, human systems, nursery. He's just incredible, as is his incredible wife. So if folks are interested in this, feel free to say, we want more Gord, and I will politely poke him continuously. If folks want to check out Gord and Ann, I highly recommend it. Both their website, their YouTube channel, all of that would be great. Gord, if folks want to know exactly when the book came out, would it be best to sign to your newsletter on eco-sense.ca?
Yeah. Sign up to the newsletter at eco-sense.ca. And we will have a notice on the sidebar as to when to expect the book out. It should be out this fall. I'm expecting October. And so it's that's the best way to keep track of it.
Awesome. Awesome. Any last words for folks, or any calls to action you'd like to give them?
Oh my goodness. Any last words for folks? Javan, I'm shitty with last words. The only thing I can probably say is that keep watching you. They've got a lot to learn. You do a great job, and thanks for hosting.
Right back at you. Couldn't have said it better myself. We are actually in a Canadian standoff.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, you too, mate. You too. Thanks so much for your time, Gord. And thanks so much for everybody who watched. This is a series of videos about easy, simple solutions we can integrate into our lives, either in the big scale and the small scale, but tangible solutions that we can actually get our hands around. So thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, click that like button. If you enjoyed the channel, click the subscribe button. If you want to know when they come out, hit the bell button, because YouTube wants to make it difficult 3 times. Don't know what you're doing, YouTube. I'll continue to end with this until you change. Thanks so much, everybody, for listening. Leave a comment below and feel free to share. As usual, be fruitful and multiply.